over the world, governments and campaigners have launched a war against plastic. It's all in an effort to save the ocean and to stop marine wildlife being harmed by our plastic pollution. They want us to use plastic less and to recycle it more. Plus, surely we should be less reliant on plastic, especially given it's made from oil. But what does the evidence actually say? In this video, we're going to investigate how it got so bad and why the war on plastic isn't working. The main problem people have with plastic is this. More and more of it is ending up in the sea. But how did it get like this? We're going to show you what actually happens to your recycling. We'll investigate the dodgy science behind banning plastic straws, and we'll reveal why people's attitudes towards plastic bags might be doing more harm than good. The problem is, plastic is almost impossible to escape. It's killing wildlife, messing up the ecosystem, ruining beautiful beaches, and it's even entered into the food chain. One study estimates that we eat a credit card's worth of plastic every week. It's everywhere. You can see it for yourself when you come to a beach like this. This is one of hundreds of beach cleans that happen across the UK every year because so much rubbish washes up on our shores. But our approach to improving things doesn't always make sense. First of all, we have to understand plastic pollution in a global context. Plastic pollution happens all over the world, but it's worst here in East Asia. China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam and Sri Lanka. These countries alone are responsible for more than half of the world's plastic in the sea. In comparison, countries like the UK rank far lower. In fact, if you add up all the countries in the EU that have a coastline, the combined total still only ranks at number 18. Now, that's not to say EU countries shouldn't improve, but if we're serious about tackling this issue, we need to look beyond our own shores. On a global scale, British plastic is fairly insignificant. Or is it? I've come down to this recycling centre here in London to find out what happens to our plastic waste. Here in the UK, around 42% of our plastic waste gets recycled. Another 42% gets burnt, and around 13% gets sent to a landfill. But no matter where it goes, it's definitely not meant to end up in the ocean. I mean, when you send your rubbish for recycling, you'd expect it to actually be recycled, right? The problem is, here in the UK, we simply don't have enough recycling centres to cope with the huge amount of plastic that we get through. Instead, the overwhelming majority of plastic is sent abroad for other countries to recycle. Last year, the UK shipped away 611,000 tonnes of plastic. And where's it sent to? That's right, a lot of it goes to Asia and the countries with the highest rate of marine plastic pollution. Until 3 years ago, around 500,000 tonnes of plastic was being sent from the UK to China and Hong Kong. In 2018, China put its foot down and banned plastic waste being brought in. Instead, the UK has turned to countries like Malaysia, Indonesia and Turkey. But these countries too are starting to clamp down. Now, of course, a lot of this plastic is recycled properly, and the vast majority of British exporters are legitimate and sustainable. But once the plastic has been shipped, it's hard to keep track of what happens to it. And there's a risk of it being mismanaged, sometimes being burnt, put in landfills, or ending up in the ocean. And that all means, no matter what your intentions, your recycling might just end up doing more harm than good. So how did we end up shipping loads of our plastic to other countries in the first place? Why don't we just build more recycling centres here in the UK? Well, the harsh reality is there's just no financial incentive. It's far cheaper to send our waste abroad and to get foreign companies to do it for us, often paying their workers lower wages. And some say it's not just about the money either. You see, manufacturing in the UK has decreased over the years. We just don't make that much stuff out of plastic anymore. Instead, plastic products are usually imported from abroad. So, the argument goes, it makes sense for us to return our used plastic back to those countries and for them to turn it into sustainable new products. The problem is, the countries that we're shipping our plastic to are often the ones worst equipped to deal with it, which is why you end up with beaches like this. And things probably won't change unless the government makes it worthwhile for people to keep their waste in Britain. So what about the plastic that isn't sent for recycling at all? The stuff we just throw in with the general waste? Well, if it can't be recycled, there's two main options left, landfill or incineration.
and some people disagree about which one is better. The UK government says incineration is better because when you burn plastic, you can convert the heat into energy and create electricity. So at least the plastic isn't being wasted, and it's a substitute for burning oil and gas. But of course, that does create carbon emissions and other pollution, so it's far from perfect. And some people say, look, we shouldn't be burning plastic to generate electricity, we shouldn't be burning anything. Instead, if you put plastic in a landfill, there are actually very, very few carbon emissions, and so long as you manage to landfill properly, any dangerous chemicals will be kept away from the natural environment. Whichever side you take, experts are united in agreeing that recycling is the best option, but only when it's done properly.
Now, it's worth pointing out that, despite the environmental problems with plastic, it's still a really useful and important material. Plastic is used everywhere, from building and manufacturing to clothes, technology, medical products, and loads more. And most of the time, it's used because it really is the best available material. For a start, it's really light, which means it takes less energy and carbon emissions to transport it. It's also easy to mould and manipulate, while still being pretty safe. Plus, it's both durable and water resistant. In fact, plastic is used to line the bottom of landfills to stop dangerous chemicals from other materials from leaking out into the ground. So, realistically, people are going to carry on using plastic for the foreseeable future. But we've got to find a way to cut down on pollution. So, what else can we do to solve the plastic problem and save our oceans? Here in the UK, the government's main policy is to reduce the amount of plastic we use, and overall, that seems like a really good idea. But some of the government's policies don't seem to be based on very good scientific evidence, or any evidence at all. Take plastic straws, for instance. We know that they can do real damage to marine wildlife, which is partly why a lot of pubs and restaurants like this one have started using paper straws instead. Now the government has gone one step further and introduced an outright ban on plastic straws. The thing is, plastic straws aren't usually recycled, so they're not part of those plastic exports we were talking about earlier. So realistically, how many plastic straws from the UK end up in the ocean? Will this ban make any difference whatsoever? This is an official government report justifying the ban on plastic straws. It claims that as many as 1% of all British straws end up in the ocean. By their estimates, that works out as up to 47 million straws every year. So we asked the government, okay, what's that figure based on? And they revealed, well, it's not based on anything, it's just an assumption. They provided no calculations or scientific evidence to back up their claim. In fact, the only thing they did have was this, another report which gives a far lower figure, less than 500,000 straws. And what's the basis of that? Again, it's just an assumption. So it turns out the government thought that this assumption was far too low, so they massively increased their top estimate without any evidence. Of course, there's no doubt that banning plastic straws will reduce the amount of plastic in the ocean a little bit. But on a global scale, it's not going to make that much difference at all.
We have bigger problems than plastic straws. What about the plates, the wrappers, and everything else that are much bigger, and they're made of the same material?
Okay, now I know what you're thinking. These new laws, they might not help much, but it's better than nothing, right? Well, actually, not always. We need to talk about bags. Plastic bags. Now, in the old days, plastic bags were usually free in Britain, but then laws were introduced to make people pay a small fee for them. The idea was that it would make people think twice before using one. But people, they still need to put their groceries into something, so shops responded with these extra thick bags called bags for life. Now these have at least twice as much plastic in as the old bags, so they're sturdier, and the idea is that you can go to the shop and use them again and again, and therefore you're not using as much plastic. But the thing is, well, humans are humans. Sometimes you go to the shop and you forget to bring your bag for life, so you buy another bag for life, and then all of a sudden your bag for life is now a bag for a day. Another alternative are these cotton tote bags, which are sold by loads of the UK's biggest shops. And there's no plastic at all in them, so it sounds perfect. But reports have pointed out that tote bags have a much bigger carbon footprint because of manufacturing and transport. In fact, you'd need to reuse your cotton tote bag 131 times to have the same carbon footprint as using a plastic bag just once. The war on plastic is so important. Oceans like this one are being polluted. Our animals are being put at risk, and plastic is entering the food chain. Now, the solution is definitely not that simple, and especially because plastic is used all over the world, it's not going to be solved that easily. But whenever you think about the plastic pollution problem in the sea, don't get it mixed up with the climate change crisis. They're both linked, they're both very important. But even if we manage to deal with the problem of plastic pollution in the sea, there's still the much bigger challenge of climate change.